Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in and turning on this week to LA Not So Confidential. This is Dr. Scott. And of course, I am virtually here with my bestie and partner in crime.
Hi, folks. It's Dr. Shiloh. Welcome back. I wonder when will we be in the same room together to record? Or will we ever? Will we just keep doing this?
Oh, I don't want to. I hope not.
I know.
I mean, because it was a blast. I mean, I think we've kind of hinted that we're sort of surreptitiously recording in one of our respective workplaces. We won't say where, but it's super cool to know that, wow, we're right in the middle of what we do and the agencies that do what we do, and we're recording this. And we did have permission. I had permission from the highest rank in my department. So I miss it too. I mean, thank God for Zoom, because of being able to look at your face. And I mean, it really, I guess this is really I know this term has been used too much, but it really is a new normal.
Yeah, it is. And I'm so glad that we have this too, because there are a couple times we just did it without any sort of visual, and it was really hard for you and I.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's something about there, as we know, I mean, there's so much to communication. And when you're talking about nonverbals, and it's you and I talking to each other. I mean, yes, we always have in the back of our minds there's an audience listening, but really it feels even intimate like this, I think.
It does. And I think it speaks to something bigger that everyone is struggling with, or most people that are being responsible are struggling with in the world today, is that, not being able to get together and hang out. And you and I spend time at each other's houses and, would go to lunch together, and you'd be in a chair right next to me at my desk while we were talking about cases or talking about upcoming projects. And for all of that to be so different for almost a year now, it's really weird.
It really, really is. Yes, but yay, we get to continue this just fine, not missing a beat.
Yeah, we get to do it. So, circling back, as someone pointed out on social media that I say a lot, so I'm going to circling back. We came at prepping this week's episode because we're right here thoroughly, all the way into fall and autumn, and whatever that means to Americans and the rest of the world, whatever part of the world or the US you're in, whether you're in Southern California where it's sunny and 70, or Manhattan where it's 40 and cloudy.
Right.
We all have these assumptions about fall. I want to wrap up in sweaters and sweat while I have my pumpkin spice latte,
Of course, because you're a basic bitch, Scott.
I'm such a basic bitch. Basic. I always think of The Good Place.
I know.
Yeah, basic.
That's my favorite little snippet right there. But you're right. I mean, this time of the season brings up lots of things for different people. And, we already covered sports crimes because now it's like full on football season.
Right.
Which, the Dodgers won the World Series. And if you guys remember, I think it was on a Get Vocal that we talked about, I have a pact with my brother that if the Dodgers win the World Series, we have to get Dodgers tattoos. So guess what?
Oh my gosh. Is it going to be the same?
Plan it.
Yeah. Are you going to use the same guy that you use that has that style that you like? What's that called?
Yes. American traditional. Yeah. Because I think I have one spot left on my upper leg, and I guess it's meant to be. So I have to design it and own up to my bet. Well, not bet, pact. So, so that will be happening. But anyway, we're sort of in this season of football, but also stressors of the holiday season. And you and I were kind of torn between the psychology and sometimes criminality of politicians because of election season.
Right.
And what we should talk about for mid-November.
Yeah, because right now it's our country, and I think the world is kind of sitting around. I don't know if the world is necessarily worried about it, or they're just sort of chomping on popcorn and watching the shit show unfold, as it has been for 4 years. But, we've got a highly polarized U.S. election, and I'm sure it's actually going to link to some of the previous episodes we've had about conspiracy theories, there's going to be a lot that develops over the next couple of months. So everybody batten down, put on your seatbelts, and get ready for the ride. But we thought this would be a great opportunity to look at what do we actually know about the personalities of the people that go into politics. I mean, and maybe the other episode that we thought about, like for the holiday season, because Thanksgiving is an American holiday and it's traditionally one of the times when families really do come together. And holiday stressors and family reunion stressors, those kind of things, that there's a lot of criminality and things that happen around that. But it seems like, and maybe we'll be able to crank that out before the end of the month. I don't know.
Yeah, I think we'll get that out. We'll get that out somewhere, somehow, because I think that's a really interesting topic.
See if we can find some turkey stuffing and cranberry sauce related crimes to discuss. But in the meantime, this is another one, like how much research has been done on this. And it looks like you found some really cool research on this subject.
Yeah, I found a pretty good study. I think it's interesting. I kind of posed the question to our audience, what do you think the psychology of a politician is, or the personality of somebody who goes into politics? And that's what we're kind of talking about here today. Of course, we are going to have that lead into talking about a couple cases of politicians actually accused of some manner of homicide. But you think, at least I'm going to take ownership of this. I think of somebody going into politics, really wanting to make a difference, really, having this allegiance sort of to public service, and it's starting good and coming from a good place, but also like this healthy amount of ego. I think everyone kind of has in their head, like, well, you got to have some ego behind it to actually get out there and do it. So I just posed that question to our audience, like, what do you think a personality trait is of somebody who goes into politics? And you and I were able to actually find some studies that looked at that. What are some things that you think of, Scott, like off the top of your head before you sort of dove into this?
Well, it's interesting because I have a lot of admiration for people who can tolerate politics. I tend to be a person, part of becoming a psychologist or aspiring to be a responsible mental health clinician and aspiring to be a responsible researcher means that you have to check your own cognitive bias constantly. And in order to have insight into your own processes and check yourself and your cognitive biases, you have to move away from concrete black and white thinking. You have to understand that my idealism is a reflection of the way that I was raised, and perhaps even, for me personally, idealism is probably like a pretty well constructed defense mechanism, given the environment that I grew up in. And it doesn't necessarily reflect doesn't reflect accurately the majority of human experience or human nature, because politics themselves are very messy. And, it's sort of like that experience where a lot of people, there's a lot of written about this online, about going into higher education. Like if you're going for a master's or a doctorate, you really tend to go into that expecting this higher level of functioning and thinking and self-awareness. And it's really shocking to get there and find out that really a good percentage of your classmates are not capable of that. Not even
right.
They're just not capable of it. And then that sort of leads to another thing of realizing that there are some people who feign ignorance because it suits their cognitive bias. And there's also people that really just aren't capable of it. And we have people, I think, that are idealistic and go into politics. And I have great admiration for people across the political spectrum, even for some people who have some very different political beliefs as I do. I can admire them for their intelligence, and I can understand and I can see their desire for a better world. And I think that's really admirable. And if we can find a place in the middle to talk, I think that's a great thing. But politics, as well as pulling people who want to make change for the positive in the world, there are just as many that are driven by other darker drives, I believe.
Right. Yeah. So that's sort of, maybe the two motivators for people going into it. I think there's also, there's a certain personality type that you would have to be able to put up with all the bullshit that comes with it. So when I started asking this question to myself, I was thinking, well, gosh, these people actually should be, not that they have to be, but should be pretty resilient people, pretty thick-skinned, have some good coping mechanisms, a good social support system, because think of all, you're just being criticized all day long.
Yeah, go on the Yahoo comment section or go on any kind of social media comment section, and you can see not only completely dumbass responses, but sometimes you can see even horrific things like, just verging on the edge of death threats or making comments about, like, why in this day and age are we ever making comments about someone's appearance in terms of objectification?
Right.
There's no reason for it.
Yeah. So not only do you have to hear or see that, but in some cases you might even have to address it. You might have to rebut it. You might have to, and publicly, all of this is happening publicly. So, that's sort of what I think about, like, what they have to be made up of personality wise. But then I also think, like, once they get into it, does it then shape them? How does politics shape or change a person? And that's also really interesting to think about too. Almost like, I'm having this like parallel thought right now of like cult leaders. Do some quote unquote cult leaders get into it for the right reasons and then get greedy or can manipulate people and see that they have that power, and then it goes like all bad? So it's like, how does it start is always the interesting piece to me. And I default to, there's probably some good, genuine intention there at the beginning. For most. I
think for the majority there are. And unfortunately, those, unless their voice is strong enough and smart enough and on the button of what is actually happening, which is a rare combination. I think of AOC, who is amazing. I don't necessarily agree with everything that she says, but I think that she is absolutely brilliant. And I think she's going to do amazing things. I think Brian Sims is one. There's just several politicians up and coming that are really like these amazing voices and that seem to radiate sort of not necessarily like a culty true believer vibe, but the fact that like, hey, we're speaking the truth. We're just going to be plain spoken. Katie Porter is another one. Like Katie Porter, I just want to sit and listen to her take people to town on C-SPAN all day, because that woman, like, she handles toddlers. I love that she says, handling these politicians is easy. I have toddlers. That's a really great response. But also in media to this subject, there are some really great movies, some older movies, some classic movies. There's a Jimmy Stewart movie, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, that is really about this, about someone that is very smart and idealistic and wants to make a change in the world. And he comes up against the harsh reality of what it is in Washington, especially at that time, which it was nothing but old white men, like pushing against that system. And there's several other ones that we'll talk about at the end that represent how your work environment can change you. We all know that. Everybody knows that your work environment can change you. For those of us that are on the front lines of healthcare, like some of our listeners, Esther, we love you. Wonderful nurse. The stressors, I'm sure that they could talk about how the most stressful and challenging parts of their work on a daily basis can change who they are. Yeah. Sometimes it can build your resilience, and sometimes it can wear you down.
Absolutely. And so that's what I'm thinking about, like constantly keeping on top of the way in which you cope to make sure you continue to be a resilient person. And when we get into our criminal cases today, we will talk about ways in which male politicians have chosen to cope that aren't necessarily the most healthy or beneficial in the long run, and has gotten them into trouble. But I also think, I think about the ego, and I think what people always come up with is narcissism. Yeah. And, do you think a healthy dose of narcissism should exist for politicians, or that there is a prevalence of NPD out there?
I don't know about the prevalence, but I completely agree with you that a healthy dose of narcissism is going to have to be necessary for any kind of success. And I wish, like, the term microdosing they use, like right now, for using hallucinogens for the treatment of depression and anxiety, which has a lot of focus on it right now. If there was a way to bottle narcissism and microdose narcissism at the right times, because I think about like what politicians have to put up with. I mean, it's akin, because they are celebrities in their own way. And it's funny, there's an old saying that Paul Begala, who's a pundit, a really, really brilliant political writer, and he says that politics is show business for ugly people.
Oh my goodness.
So
I've never heard that. That's funny.
Yeah. I mean, I think it is. There's certainly like sort of a carnival barker part of it. And I think the ones that bray the loudest in that arena are probably not the smartest, but it does take this level of how much crap can you take from literally millions of people that may hold, political views different from yours. And the higher you rise up on either side, the more you become a target of that public. And so that's got to affect you as well, right?
Sure. I mean, I would think it's probably, forget narcissism, it'd probably be good to have a little bit of,
sociopathy.
Psychopathy flavors in there. So you don't give a shit what people are saying or thinking, and you're kind of focused on your agenda. But then, the flip side to that is you don't give a shit, and you're just going out for your own agenda.
No, but you've got a great point. And I think that the healthy version of not giving a shit is realizing I don't have any power to do anything about that.
Yeah.
Like, which is a great personal boundary to understand about yourself and about the world around you, is like, what can you affect? What do you have agency and volition to change, and what do you not? And then it's incumbent upon you to like, well, this is what I came here to do. I got elected, or I came here to do this. These are my responsibilities, and I can't make everybody happy. Mm-hmm. It's just not possible.
Mm-hmm. So you found some stuff from Brainscape?
Oh, Brainscape. Thank you. So you were asking earlier about the qualities, and I kind of, before I even started researching, I was taking notes down because I wanted to ask this question of like, what does it take to be a politician, and what do we know about what's found in politician? What is there anything on what makes a good politician? And Brainscape really gave a great kind of breakdown of 6 qualities, and one is confidence, which makes complete sense. Confidence is a quality that, can be described physically in so many different ways across a spectrum of people. And confident, but it's sort of this ineffable quality of walking into a room and not necessarily owning the room, but owning your space within the room. Mm-hmm. And sometimes people are confident without anything to back it up. Like, there's people that are confident that are just idiots. And we run into those a lot. That's very interesting.
Or confidence men, right?
Confidence men, exactly. But then there's also charm. And charm is another quality that either you got it or you don't. And a lot of charm for me as an observer, I think, arises out of people knowing just the amount of confidence of where they stand in the room in a group of people, and the amount of self-deprecation or humor that they bring to that confidence.
Absolutely. Yeah. I thought you were going to say what charm is to me, and you were going to talk about how charming you were right now. But no, you're right. I went to a training recently, and it was actually all about Black American history, and it was specifically for like command staff and law enforcement. And the way that I described our 2 presenters, and they're from George Washington University in DC, is that they were just so charming that I think everyone had buy-in from the first second that they started to just be so open to the material that they were presenting, even though we knew it was all in a day and age where people could go in there a little defensive.
Intentions are high, yeah.
Right, feeling like, we're in this training because of this awful incident with George Floyd that happened, and we're all the way across the country. But I just described them over and over again as charming, because they were just the humor that came with it, the way in which they were just so genuine with the crowd, but still had some. The training was amazing. It was only 2 hours. I could have sat there for 40 hours, but it was great. But I think charm and confidence, those two that you've already named, that's what draws us to people. And
Absolutely.
That's, as a politician, that's what you need to like draw people in. Otherwise you could just have your agenda and your views on a piece of paper.
I think it's also, yeah. And I would say it's important to relate this back to our cult episode too, because I think every cult leader to some extent starts out as charming. It's one of the things that Jim Jones, if you watch the documentaries and read the research about Jim Jones, when he started out as a lay preacher in, I think, the Oakland area or San Francisco area, everybody talks about how charming he was. And just like when he looked at you, you really felt like he cared and that he was interested in you. And, so it's interesting. Like, did he start, what happened at what point where he started believing his own publicity, I guess.
Yeah.
But then, so those are the first two, confidence and charms. The next one, which is so important as well, is relatable. You've got to find some way to be relatable. And now this is an interesting point to make, but like, look, the majority, and I don't agree with this. I think it's terrible that this is the way, excuse me. I think that this is a terrible manifestation within our political system, but the majority of our elected officials are incredibly rich. Like they're literally, the majority of them are millionaires, because it takes money to get yourself set up. So how can the majority of our country relate to that? And so these people have to put on a persona to prove how relatable they are. And what's interesting, I mean, sort of talking about our current sitting president, John Mulaney, the comedian, said something really apt about him years ago before he was elected. He said that Trump is the poor man's idea of what a rich man is.
Yes, like almost a cartoon character. Yeah.
So, but that being said, Trump found a way to be relatable. I think his relatableness came from division, as opposed to other people that sort of are trying to make messages of unity. But I'm not saying that every politician that has a message of unity is actually authentic about it. Some of them are absolutely not authentic, and they don't practice what they preach. But being relatable is something that certainly sells well. And in order to be relatable, you have to be willing to go to where the blue collar workers are and where the majority of people that make middle or low income in our country. And sometimes some of our most dynamic politicians won't do that, and to their own detriment and to the detriment of the country as well.
Sure. So even if, say they're millionaires, they may not be relatable in terms of like lifestyle or their day-to-day life. But if they do something like start talking like them or verbalizing an ideology that might be relatable, that could be enough.
Right. So it's the idea of, I think, who was it that there's a politician that did really well right now in the Midwest, and I'm blanking on his name, but and he was running against an incumbent, but he did really well because he was able to actually know what the costs of living were and what the wages were for blue collar and manual laborers. And whereas the guy that had been sitting in that position for years had not a clue. And I think that's really represented very well in an episode of Arrested Development in the earlier seasons, where Lucille Bluth, who's this rich matriarch, completely disconnected from the real world. And they're talking about this frozen banana stand that the family has owned at the beach for years. And like Michael is trying to tell her about the money and the budgeting. And she's like, Michael, how much could a banana cost? $10? She's just like this completely clueless individual about what a banana actually costs.
That's hilarious.
So far we've got confidence, charm, relatability. There's also goal oriented. So orientation towards goal and volition and being able to carry a direct and linear narrative of what your platform is going to be absolutely integral to any successful politician. And what helps it is that if you don't have it necessarily for yourself, because I think we do have some people that are very high up in politics right now that clearly have symptoms of ADHD that I can see, but they can be surrounded by people that can keep them on task. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because the creativity and the spontaneity of that ADHD or whatever else is going on for them may very well work for them in the long run. The one that I was surprised by that they talk about is uncomplicated. Because
how's that defined?
The way it's defined in that article is not clear to me. I'll post it for everyone to read because I think it's interesting. Yeah, because, or maybe I'm not necessarily biased, but I'm challenged by the fact that we continue to elect people that are incredibly complicated, as if they're not complicated. We're electing people with crazy ass backgrounds and backgrounds that don't support the positions that they're running for. So I'm not really sure there. Maybe we can look into it. We can discuss it on the Get Vocal afterwards. I think that'd be interesting.
Yeah, I wonder if it's also about like their messaging, like the more just streamlined and uncomplicated that the messaging is, the more people understand that. And then maybe it's relatability, because I would like to know, like, personality wise, how do you say someone's uncomplicated? Like how much baggage they're bringing? Well,
you know what? Then thank you for that. Cause I think that's how I was, I think you're actually correct. I was interpreting that a different way. So yeah, I think you're probably spot on. I'll read more on it then, but like the messaging is just uncomplicated, which it's one of the reasons I love Elizabeth Warren so much. And I hope she ends up, having a great position in the next administration, because damn, the woman's got a working, mapped out plan for literally everything.
Yeah.
Just amazing stuff. And then the last one, of course, is fearlessness, which I think is absolutely, it's almost akin to the first point, which is confidence. You have to be fearless. You have to be able to go in there knowing that people are going to hate you and that people are actually going to want you dead, especially in the divisive times we live right now. People are fine to post on social media how much they hate another candidate and how much they wish he was dead, which I think is such an odd position to take.
Yeah, no kidding.
So, what I found also in other articles is looking at who goes into politics. And one of the things that certainly is driving people, which, and this educated me, because I just thought it was like, well, it's people who want to either become a celebrity in their own right, or they want to advocate for change that they believe in, whether or not I believe in that change, they want to advocate for change. So who goes into politics? It generally boils down to people who have aspiration and advocacy towards change. They're invested in influencing the course of the government and governance. And it's one of the things that is sort of integral to our party system right now, is that when we look at generally the people that are described on the right as conservatives want to change less, except for reducing the amount of government, like reducing it. One politician is famous for saying he wanted government so small that you could drown it in a bathtub, which I think is a very bizarre image to use, and not as humorous as he probably thought that it was coming off as. Versus on the other side, people that want a lot of government. And so anyway, once again, it's about these, where you fall on that spectrum. There are other people that clearly are driven just by making a career. I have worked with people in private practice that I think I just want a career in politics. And I would say, well, tell me about what you want to do that. Oh, I just think I'd be really good at it. Okay. That's interesting. And then there's also some people are really, really motivated by the thrill of competition.
Yes, there are.
That's interesting because I'm not competitive in that way. So that to me is, what do you think about that?
I think those people definitely exist. And I think there's a lot of different ways in which they can sort of live that out. And politics totally makes sense. I mean, it is one big competition. And it's not one where you have to be athletic. So, just about anybody can throw together some sort of campaign. And I think there's definitely a risk-taking component to it. There's probably a rush that comes with it in sort of the build-up, especially. I mean, just think about like how it feels to be a citizen with a build-up to an election. We were on pins and needles for days. But if you're the person that's in the middle of that, I was kind of thinking like, God, how is this for the candidates that this is being drug out? But that can be a thrill. That can be something that really is where they find pleasure in life.
Right.
It's another way to do it.
Right. Fulfillment. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So reiterating what I said earlier is like of the 534 members of Congress, 268 have become millionaires.
Whoa.
And the 6 wealthiest counties in the U.S. are all contiguous around Washington, D.C.
Whoa. Interesting.
That's a problem. That's really a problem.
Pretty stark.
Yeah. But now the flip side is who doesn't go into politics. And unfortunately, it's the very people that need the most representation, which is working class people. Mm-hmm. And part of it is that there's no real clear pathway for them to do that. And it's not about, there are just as many intelligent, smart, creative, and driven working class people. But if you're making a working class wage, how do you start a campaign? I mean, that's a really big challenge. So workers make just as good as politicians when they are given the opportunity to represent. Mm-hmm. And like we said, the major barrier is drumming up funds for campaigning, because where do those funds come from? The funds come from corporations, or they come, sometimes you can get it from grassroots organization, but even grassroots funding takes an incredible foundation to get started. It's not like it can just happen overnight.
I mean, I know some people who are running for like the local school board in my area and was supportive of them. And I was thinking of that, getting the materials to just go have door hangers or flyers or just like logistics of putting together a lot of that. And some people are able to run really nice campaigns at the most small local level, but they're probably out a few $1,000s, and not everybody can do that.
Exactly. And as you were saying that, it made me think, when you hear about people's pasts, like if they're writing a bio somebody, what they would describe as Miss So-and-so who had a failed campaign running for school board in Loma Linda in 1992. It's like, well, what the hell does that mean?
Yeah, come on.
Like how should that be? What is a failed campaign? Like she ran, or he ran.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Huh. So I was so happy to be able to find a study just about personality when it comes to politicians who are already sort of at their peak, and studying them, using them as guinea pigs for once. No. But in 2017, Christian Jarrett did a study where he was able to get 278 state legislators to participate in this study, in which he gave them a personality test. And he gave them the Big Five personality test, which is basically, one of the most well-researched, backed personality tests, fairly simple compared to other ones. And it's really looking at 5 dimensions that tell us about a cluster of personality traits for individuals. And these personality traits, like most personality traits, are really very stable at the individual level. So meaning, like, if you test someone when they're 20 years old and then you test them again when they're 30, the results are going to be pretty similar. even as people age. So what he did is he looked at these legislators and then compared them against just kind of a general population sample as well. So there's five, like I said, 5 dimensions. There's conscientiousness, which is being organized, being thorough, being a planner. There's also agreeableness, so being sympathetic, being a kind individual, maybe even affectionate in person. Extroversion is on there as well. So think about your talkative, energetic, assertive individual, as well as openness. So having a wide amount of interests, being fairly imaginable and insightful and willing to entertain new ideas. And then neuroticism. So kind of that anxious, tense, moody piece of us, that's one of the scales as well. So it was interesting that he found that when he compared the politician scores to the politicians scored higher than the public on conscientiousness, agreeableness, and extroversion. So this makes sense. I mean, all of this, none of this was like a surprise or anything, but
they're self-reporting they're also self-reporting on their view of themselves, right?
Correct. So with the conscientiousness, this he sort of interpreted that as like they're hardworking, they're paying attention to detail. You have to be organized and thorough, at least to get to this point. The agreeableness, to be able to deal with a steady streak of people that are constantly wanting to talk to you, constantly wanting you to hear them, to help them. That's something you have to be open to. You have to be sympathetic and at least listen and engage with people. Most politicians. And then the extroversion, I mean, obviously, like you're out there, you're on stage, you have to work the crowd. But he found that the politicians on average scored lower than the public on the last 2, openness. So that's the having, a wide variety of interests, which, he says like a life of committee hearings and debates might actually put people off that have more artistic tendencies, which is what the openness dimension, that's the type of people that normally fall into this category. So it's like, okay, I have to be open to entertain people's ideas, but then I gotta like hone in on the issues. And if I want to go, have some creative project on the side, you're probably not going to have time for that, nor maybe you're just born without that interest. And so openness is going to be lower. However, there is also the hypothesis that the average American prefers politicians who are a bit more on the conservative side and traditional side. So if you're conservative and traditional, you're going to be less open to experience. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I mean, I think actually that could be pulled apart even further too, because it's about what does that mean that there is a preference towards someone who's conservative and traditional? It means, I mean, I'm going to kind of jump off on this and say that I think that is less threatening to someone's understanding. Like, oh, this is something I can understand, but that's not always going to be best, because if you're not open to new ideas, then you're not progressing and evolving in your...
I agree.
Anyway, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I sort of interpreted this one as like, we want to hold our politicians to a higher standard. So whatever the more traditional view of that is, maybe that speaks to people. So I don't know. Interesting. This is 2017. This is fairly recent. I'd love the study to be replicated with kind of the younger, more progressive faces that have been in there recently. But the politicians were also scored lower than the population on neuroticism. So basically, they're not going to freak out over every little decision or setback, which is good, right?
It is good. And I think, but it's also a source of frustration for people as well, because in a way, you want them to have the same investment that you have, right? Because a person, a guy in Appalachia who comes from 6 generations of coal miners, like that is important to him. I mean, it's of ultimate importance, and he may not really understand, like, hey, dude, that industry is going away, right? So, but the person who's representing him can't necessarily be so pulled into that one particular issue that they're not seeing the bigger picture down the road,
Yeah. Yeah. I will put a link to the Big 5 personality test in our show notes because it's very simple. I also found a website last night where you can sort of guess where you will be on each of these and then take the test and see. And I was pretty spot on. I was high on all of them except for neuroticism. I was really, really low. So
I'll be through the roof on that one. I will be on the needs to be medicated into that spectrum.
Like a red light starts going off. Mine was so low. Like I was like, okay, well, I'll be under the 50th percentile. I don't freak out over much at all. And I was really low. Like on a score of 1 to 100, my score was like 11.
Wow.
I know. I thought it was going to be like a 30 or something, but anyway. So yeah, I'll put that in the show notes. It's kind of fun. I think most people will be probably, yourself on these, like you'll be spot on a lot.
Yeah, but it's still interesting to look at it and see, even the questions I think are very thought provoking. You really have to think about, like, it's just not that there's some very interesting questions there.
Yes. And it's not like a, 700 question MMPI test or anything. It'll take you literally 5 minutes to fill out. So that, I think that kind of sums it up. Like I think people have a good idea in their head of what the person who goes into politics is like.
So now, we're going to give you some examples that are definitely outliers and that also have an intersection with criminality. So that's going to be very interesting. After we've laid the groundwork for what works and what doesn't work in the creation of the ultimate politician.
Sure. And of course, we always have cases to highlight primarily behavior, because it's not like we're trying to diagnose any of these individuals or really, make too many determinations about their psychological makeup, which is why we do the whole front end of what is generally there. But I think these are outliers. So I think we gave a really good background to the personality makeup for the majority of politicians. And now we're going to talk about some criminal cases, which we always talk about mainly to highlight behavior because we don't have a ton of information or reliable information on the personality makeup of specific cases. But hopefully we laid a good foundation and can get into, some of these more notorious cases that are really interesting. And there's a lot of overlap between the two that we're going to talk about today, which is weird. I didn't realize till sort of the end. But I'm going to start out with talking about the Chandra Levy case, which happened. It spans a crazy amount of time, which I also didn't realize. But it started in 2001 when Chandra Levy, who was a 24-year-old intern with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, went missing in Washington, D.C. And the Federal Bureau of Prisons, if someone gets charged and convicted of a federal crime, they go to prison in this system. It's not like they go to their local state prison. So the federal government runs pretrial services on the front end. Of course, there's the federal courts, and then they get convicted and go to federal prison. And after that, they would be supervised by federal probation officers. So there's a whole federal criminal justice system. And she was interning for them. She was originally from Modesto, California, which also is infamous for being Lacey Peterson's hometown. But Chandra was quite remarkable and quite a driven young lady. She had a BA in journalism. She was earning her master's in public administration from USC at the time that she was in her internship. I think it's super interesting, kind of this fun fact that I came across, that when she was working with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, she was responsible for handling a lot of the media inquiries that were coming in for the upcoming execution of Timothy McVeigh, who was the domestic terrorist who blew up the Oklahoma City building. I just, what a responsibility, what an amount of experience to handle that as an intern. Very cool. So in May 2001, her parents, who were out here in California, Modesto, had not heard from her in a few days, like 5 days. And that was quite unusual. She was very close to her parents. And so they notified police in DC, Metropolitan Police Department out there. And the police were able to search her apartment, and they found all of her belongings except for her keys. The only thing that was not there were her keys. All of her belongings were there, her purse, her ID, and a partially packed suitcase, and her laptop. So during the search, a detective who was not a forensic technician sits down at her laptop to start playing around with it to see what he can find, and ends up corrupting the entire thing. So not helpful when you're looking for a missing person, because laptop has so much information.
Also just inexcusable as well. Completely inexcusable. That's breaking the law of not the law. It's breaking the rules of all crime scene investigation.
Yeah. I mean, usually, especially with a like a desktop, they always say just unplug and take as is. Like that's the rule of thumb. With the laptop, it would be like, do not turn it on, get it to the lab. And that can be looked through pretty quickly by somebody who has that experience. I know when there's a missing person, and I'm sure they were like, oh shit, this is pretty high profile. She's an intern here in DC. I'm sure they had good intentions. I'm not trying to say they didn't, but it was pretty hindering to the investigation because it took a while for them to be able to get information off of there. But in the meantime, her parents were also sort of doing their own investigation from home, and were able to get Chandra's phone records and realized that there was multiple phone calls back and forth to this number that they didn't really recognize, but they are able to determine that it comes back to California Congressman Gary Condit. So they provide this information to police. Her father says, she never said anything to us, and this is kind of unusual. Do you think maybe they had some sort of relationship going on? And then Chandra's aunt comes forward and actually says that she was a confidant of Chandra's, and Chandra said, yes, I'm having an intimate relationship with Congressman Condit. So that very soon actually gets leaked to the media and the press. And I mean, it's on after that. I mean, do you remember like kind of the media storm about all of this?
It was insane. It was absolutely insane. It was all over the news. It was the same, like even to the point where it was the same pictures over and over. Like they had gotten a handle on a couple of photos of the two of them together, and just over and over again. And I mean,
it was very tabloidy.
It very much was. Yeah.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I was younger than Chandra at this time, but I was graduating from college and thinking about like my future in law enforcement and internships. And, I really related to her because I thought like how cool, she leaves California to go do this really like high profile, cool internship, and, maybe finds this mentor in this congressman, but also, it turns into this salacious affair, which, on her part, like, hey, she's a single girl doing her thing. On his part, it's the one that doesn't look so good. But I just remember her being very relatable because she had been like a police explorer when she was younger. And we had sort of a similar interest and trajectory, but it was just like nonstop in the media. There was, that one picture of like him kind of like awkwardly with his arm around her shoulder, very benign. Like, he would probably take a picture with every intern. But she was not his intern. Like, I want to clarify that they happened to meet, and then he represented her state. So I think that was kind of the initial connection. And what he would say, like, oh, she was from my state. And so when we met, like, yes, we had a little bit of a thing in common. So back to the computer, it took about a month before the forensic techs were able to reconstruct her computer. And so they found that in the day that she went missing, there were searches for this area called Rock Creek Park, which is right smack dab in the middle of Washington, D.C. I don't know if it's a national park, but it's affiliated with the National Park Service. Probably because it's in DC just by default, but it's a very woodsy park, a creek, rocky, just like the name says, trails where people would hike and walk, but a lot of wooded areas where it could be really thick. And
it is, I was just looking it up. It's an urban park, but it is administered by the National Park Services.
Okay, gotcha. So Metro PD does, an initial sort of limited search of the park. I don't know what that means. Maybe they went along the common trails. It makes sense that if the only thing she took were her keys, that she would have gone through for a jog or a walk in the park. But what's really interesting is she also looked up there was like an old mansion or house that sat in the park on the property. And she specifically looked that up. Now, for me, I would be like, oh, that's an interesting thing to go check out. It was also speculated, like, was that a meeting place, like to meet up with somebody? And supposedly, it came out later that whenever she would meet up with Gary Condon, he would tell her not to bring her ID with him or with her, so that if they were ever like found out or stopped or something like that, like I don't know, like she was just sort of, it was super like shady on the down low, Washington DC sneakery.
Let's highlight that for when we wrap this up. I mean, when we come back to talking about him, it's like, that's a really shady directive to make.
I think it's just so kind of gross about like it's power creepy. And how you can tell someone creepy. Not to do that. At that point, like, I don't care who you are, you're going to feel a little less than like, okay, I can't even bring my ID to protect you if we get caught. Come on.
Right.
What am I going to, yeah. So that's really interesting just about like the searches that were on her computer. And the case still has like a ton of attention from the media, especially the American news media. And there is some investigation into Condon, but he was not very cooperative. So he refused to submit a polygraph test administered by DC police. At some point, his attorney said that they did one with a private polygraph examiner in which he passed, but who knows? And maybe, and yes, I'm sure you can pay someone to have any results you want. But he actually had a rock solid alibi. I mean, he was in meetings with the vice president the day that she went missing. All of that is on record, multiple witnesses, meetings all day long. I think his wife was even in town at the time. But they did end up doing a search warrant at his condo. It didn't turn up anything of note. But prior to the search warrant happening, there was just some guy who was sitting in a park and at night. And of course, since this is all over the news, like everybody knows what Gary Condon looks like. He sees Gary Condon leaning over a trash can, like shoving something way down into the bottom of it. And obviously says like, that doesn't look right, and ends up calling the cops. And so they go and search the trash can, and they find a box that had contained a watch, like a men's watch. And they actually do really great detective work. Didn't really lead anywhere, but they track this box down to a store in California. and to the purchaser, who was a female flight attendant, who said, yes, I bought this watch and I give it to him, and I've been having an affair with him. So, like, you know, we're starting to paint a picture of what this guy is up to in his personal life, aside from what he's portraying to the public, because he was very outspoken about the whole Clinton-Lewinsky scandal in the late 90s. And like, isn't that always the way, right? Whatever they're barking the loudest about.
Seriously,
sometimes.
It just seems like a regular pattern, especially in politics. I'm sure it happened. Certainly, obviously, it happens across the spectrum of male behaviors in our culture and other cultures around the world as well. But it is particularly highlighted in politics because we see it over and over again, and it's particularly interesting when the two parties go at each other about these things. When one party is constantly sort of framing itself as the moral party, and the party that it tends to be more religious and like supposedly following all of these rules, and they're very quick to point fingers, and then it happens to them.
Yeah,
it
happens to them
and over.
No,
I'm sorry.
It does not happen to them.
Thank you very much for
Stop
that.
minimizing.
Also externalizing blame instead of internalizing. No, these are actions that you chose to take, including vilifying someone else for engaging in exactly the same behaviors.
Completely. And you feel so much guilt and shame over what you're doing that you're going to get up there and pretend like everybody else who's doing it is the big bad person.
Right. But I think one of the things that's interesting about the case about Condit in this particular situation is just how odd he is through the whole thing. He's odd. He's got, and I think there was more than one affair, right? Like, was there more than just that flight attendant? So it was indicated that he was involved with other people as well. So that seems to be a recurring theme among politicians as well. Is like this: is it that they have an overinflated sense of power? Is it because people are attracted to people that are in his power of position, or his position of power of position of power? Is that attractive, or is it a combination of those two dynamics coming together that create this, really horrific opportunity for multiple affairs to be happening at the same time?
I think it's all of that, and it's funny that you, in the first half today, you talked about it being like a position of celebrity, because that's what it mimics to me. There is this sensation about, you even go to Washington, D.C., and there is just a feeling like when you land, like it is buzzing, people are doing important shit left and right. And, there's kind of this thrill of it. And I could see that totally being the case, just like we see with, celebrities or rock stars or, whatever. It's sort of the magic of all of those, that combination. And I don't care what people are doing in their sex life or their romantic lives, as long as people aren't getting hurt.
Right.
And,
and don't portray yourself to be something that you're not.
Thank you. Yeah.
If everybody's being an adult and like we're being transparent and this is what I do, I have an open relationship, I engage in this, and everybody is on board with it. That's one thing, but don't pretend to be this paragon of virtue to your constituents when you're not.
Yeah. Yeah. So towards the end, like we're getting towards like end of summer of 2001, and he's coming up for re-election. So his attorney basically suggests like, hey, you should probably do an interview with the media, try and set some stuff straight, because, you're denying that you had anything to do with this, which he has denied ever since. And so he decides to do an interview with Connie Chung, the news anchor. And here's his opportunity to sort of set the story straight. And it was the most awkward, uncomfortable interview. She kind of comes out with very direct questions at the beginning, like, were you having a relationship with her? Did you have anything to do with her disappearance? Did you kill her? Do you know who did? And it's like, no. It's all one-word answers. And then she tries to get into the meat of it, like, tell me about the nature of your relationship and blah, blah, blah. And he won't answer anything. Like, I don't even know why he did it. And it made him look worse than probably we thought before he even did it. So it was incredibly counterproductive. And spoiler alert, he did not win re-election that year.
And interestingly too, like when we talk about those qualities that we mentioned earlier, that sort of innate, covert, narcissistic presentation of, I'm going to come on here. Like, you knew what you were signing up for.
Yeah.
So did you just decide you were going to wing it and not give any answers? I mean, that is delusional thinking that you're going to be able to get away with doing that. It doesn't work that way. And certainly, I mean, this has been how many years ago now? This is like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly in today's government and in today's media, you're not going anywhere without some publicist or with an army of advisors that have absolutely prepared you for every single question that you're going to be asked. So even then they did versions of that. I mean, I think it's certainly probably even more now, but the idea that he just gave those kind of answers, and you can actually watch it on YouTube. It's disturbing. Like,
it is. And
somebody's dead, this person you supposedly cared about is dead or missing. And come on.
Right. And there's a really great 3-part ID channel series on this case, and they interview Connie Chung about this experience, and she's like, 2 things stood out to me. One was he could not get out of the room fast enough when the interview was over. He literally got up and got hung up by his mic that was still attached to him. Like, he forgot to take it off, and it pulled him back. And he turns to her and says something to the effect of I thought you were going to be a nice lady. Rather than she was just being a journalist asking questions, and she's not inappropriate at all. She's spot on trying to get answers.
Well, let's also be clear, because there's a very anti-journalist movement in our country today as we speak, which is bullshit, because journalists do what they're supposed to do. In fact, I mean, the idea of there's a term that was coined, by Sarah Palin when she was running, of gotcha journalism.
Right.
Well, that's what journalism is supposed to be. Journalism is supposed, interviewers are supposed to hold up the truth of it and make you answer for your inconsistencies and contradictions. And it's funny because I think that America is like a toddler in this respect. We think that we should allow people to create these alternative realities and alternative facts. Whereas if you watch the British Parliament, they freaking hold their feet to the fire. I mean, it is fascinating to watch. It's like Maury Povich in a way compared to our system,
Isn't Connie Chung married to Maury Povich?
Oh, that's right.
How funny. Can you also say gotcha journalism in a Sarah Palin accent?
Oh, well, no, I can say this. Well, I'm going to have to read them and get back to you. Remember that when she
magazines, she what do you read?
She could not name any newspaper or magazine that she read.
God bless Tina Fey.
Oh gosh, yeah.
So there's all this intense media coverage, and then boom, what happens September 11th, 2001? We have not domestic terrorism incident. We have the incident of 9/11, and obviously all eyes are now on that. All law enforcement resources in the Washington, D.C. area are on that. And everything
is redirected.
Everything
is redirected to that.
Life
as well, it should be. It was a major world event. It happened on U.S. soil to U.S. citizens, massive loss of life. But it was something that was an enormous sort of awakening for the rest of the world that these kind of things can happen on American soil, which had not happened previous to that.
I can't think of any news story or event bigger to take away attention from something. And so essentially Chandra's case goes cold at this point. Just all attention and all resources are now redirected. But May 2002, the next year, her skeletal remains are found in Rock Creek Park by a man walking his dog. And it's just essentially bones left after this time. So this is a year later, a full year. But pretty early on, murder is presumed because of her clothing and the way that her clothing was found. So the clothing that was found was like a shirt and some leggings and some tennis shoes, like she had gone for a jog or a walk in the park. And her shirt was inside out, so as if it had been taken off. And as were the leggings. And in the leggings towards the end, like where the ankle piece would be, were tied in loops, like you could tie someone's wrists down with them. So they definitely were like, there was some sort of assault or something that happened here. So definitely, it was presumed that she met with foul play. And then it comes to light that there's a man named Ingmar Guandique who was already arrested for attacking women in Rock Creek Park. And another inmate in prison with him said that he confessed to attacking Levy in prison to him. So it takes a very, very long time. I don't know if that's because of still, what's going on with 9/11, as well as just not having much except for circumstantial evidence, as well as really just like an informant's word for it. But in March 2009, the Metropolitan Police Department finally obtains a warrant to arrest Guandique, who had been identified 8 years earlier and sort of dismissed. But prosecutors think they have a good enough case. And one of the things that they have, actually, one of the things that works against them later in the long run is they end up giving him a polygraph test, just as a tool, because we know we can't use this in court, but he passes it. However, they used an interpreter because English was not his first language. He's from South America. He's from El Salvador.
Now, this makes things way more complex. It's
way more muddy because, you and I have worked with polygraph examiners in, some of the probation work that we've done. And it's very dependent on the examiner themselves. I mean, it's an art, right? I'm not a huge fan or proponent of polygraphs, but I will say a polygraph is only as good as its examiner.
And it does have its utility in certain situations, just not what most people think it's good for.
Right. That's a great way to sum it up. So using an interpreter is not best practice. I would say that's how I'll sort of clarify that. So anyway, he passes his polygraph, but still they're able to arrest him. And in 2010, they actually get a conviction for Chandra Levy's murder. I think the circumstantial evidence of him attacking 2 other women, their stories, they're still alive. They're able to account their stories to prosecutors. He gets sentenced to 60 years in prison for Chandra's murder. I think some things that we can look at for him that was circumstantial, but really sounds supportive of him being the correct suspect was not only that he had attacked these other 2 women in the same park, and we know the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. He failed to show up for work on the day of Levy's disappearance. And then his former landlady recalls his face being all scratched up and bruised around that time. So, it really fits the scenario, of someone trying to fight him off. And, they could not prove a manner of death. So, that's kind of hinky because they hypothesize, okay, it could have been strangulation, but the hyoid bone was missing, which that could have been dragged off by animals in the woods. If they had that, they would have been able to prove that. Or did he attack her and, basically like left her out there? Was she like tied up and he left her out there to the elements, which I don't know. I'm guessing he probably killed her. But regardless, he gets convicted. And then in 2015, just 5 years ago, he was granted a new trial after a series of appeals. And in 2016, prosecutors announced that they weren't going to proceed with a case against him. They did not think they had enough for a conviction second time around, and that they would instead seek to deport him. So he lost his bid to remain in the U.S. in 2017 and was deported back to El Salvador. So Levy's case technically remains unsolved. 15 years after the crime in 2016, Gary Condit decides to write a book about the situation and go on the Dr. Phil show. And it was like, okay, 15 years later, like, let's hear it. And he shows up with his co-author on the book and basically says nothing again. It was like the Connie Chung interview all over again. It was crazy.
I mean, once again, that to me, that's not necessarily an indicator of guilt, but it is an indicator that, you know, he's an eccentric, odd, disordered individual, or his behaviors are disordered. Because if you can't even, you know, amp up your ASPD to the extent that you can fake something for an interview, right, like, or his intelligence. Like, I'm not sure like what his history was between the time that he didn't get elected anymore, how he supported himself. But, you know, if you can't answer questions like that, and I'm not the hugest fan of Dr. Phil, but come on, what would be the expectation of going on a show like that? You know, you're going to get grilled.
Right.
I mean, or is it just like, oh, I'm going to go and promote my book and I'm going to be able to sit there and not answer anything?
That's kind of what it was like. And, you know, his whole thing throughout all of this was not being forthcoming at all of the extent of his relationship with Chandra. And even on Dr. Phil, he said, like, okay, so I saw her one time outside of the office. I saw her at a restaurant. You know, she came by my condo once or twice, and a handful of times. Like, he's all over the place. He can't even get his story straight after 15 years. Like, at least just pick one and stick with it. And so Dr. Phil tries to ask him about having a sexual relationship with Chandra, and he won't answer it. And then so Dr. Phil turns to his co-author and says, when we read this book, will we get the impression or the idea that there was a sexual relationship? And the co-author says, yeah. So it's like, he doesn't want to say the words. And that's so interesting. And I would think the family would just want to know, like, just own whatever you did.
Even at this point about that,
sex with an intern.
Right.
Like,
at this point, what does that actually matter? You know, it's respect, and also just inhabiting a space where you can respect that a life has been lost.
Right.
You know, that this was someone's daughter, this was someone's sister, niece, whatever, who was, by all accounts, a really accomplished young woman with a great future ahead of her. And just I mean, it's interesting kind of going back. We've said this in other episodes that, you know, everybody loves a great comeback story. And Western culture is very forgiving of people who own their shit and ask for forgiveness.
Yeah.
Like, if he had just said, like, yeah, I misstepped, I was in a position of power, or I was stressed out and horny as a result, like sex was my coping skill. There's a whole spectrum of things that could have been said.
Right. She was a remarkable woman. And, you know, I got caught up in that, and, you know, sort of hiding behind this, like, respect for my own family. Then don't go on a television show and talk about it. Like, don't put yourself out there to begin with. That's
incredibly disordered thinking. You know, where you're expecting like some sort of delusional outcome from what your actions are going to be. That just doesn't make sense.
And I don't think he had anything to do with her murder. I mean, I think Gwandike had, I think they had the right guy.
Everything points to it. But it also, also that space that, you know, the legal system and attorneys inhabit, where if we don't have enough evidence to absolutely take this to trial again, then why waste the resources?
I know.
You know?
I know. Yeah. It's, this is just one of those cases that I had forgot how much time it spanned, and just sort of there's a lack of resolution, but it gets lost in everything, because there's kind of like, oh yeah, I thought there was someone that got arrested for it, and then what happened again? But I'm glad we revisited this one.
Yeah, there's just so much, and certainly my case as well it has many parallels and comes from even earlier and is still relevant today. But let's take a break. Okay, we are back. So the case that I was going to cover following up the Chandra Levy Gary Condit story is that very famous in American history, the story of the Chappaquiddick incident with Ted Kennedy. So for those of you that are maybe younger listeners that live outside the U.S., basically the Kennedy clan has had a very profound, rich, and generational history in the American experience. This is a family of East Coast wealth, a Catholic family. Our president, one of our most famous Democratic presidents, was a Kennedy, JFK, Jonathan F. Kennedy, who was assassinated while in office. It was a very dark period in American history, whether or not people agreed with his politics or not. Then his brother, Bobby Kennedy, was sort of next in line to become president. He was assassinated here in Los Angeles under what, if both of these assassinations ended up feeding conspiracy theories in our culture that last to today. Multiple movies have been made about them, multiple theories. And then there was a mysterious death of John F. K. Jr., who was JFK's son, who was this really sort of a shining star in the family. Like, he had taken their political legacy, and I would say actually more so than any other Kennedy, had created his own niche in our culture, first through publishing, and then probably eventually would have gone into politics. And he died in a freak airplane accident with his wife while flying out to one of their properties, which is just horribly tragic. So there's a lot of other, I mean, we could do a mini series. I mean, I think Ken Burns should do a mini series on the Kennedys, because it absolutely is fascinating. But one absolutely fascinating chapter in this is the story of Ted Kennedy, who was another one of the brothers. And looking back at the story of these three sons of this Irish American politician, their father, who really kind of fits some of the behaviors and the descriptions of an overbearing and very distinctly oriented towards political career individual, and wanted to live that out through his sons. And we see that in several of our political dynasties here in the U.S. But Ted Kennedy had a checkered past. He was sort of, I wouldn't say the black sheep of the family, but he certainly was not in line for the political career that Bobby and JFK were. However, he was forging his own path, and somewhere around midnight, Friday, July 18th and July 19th, 1969, on the East Coast, on the small island of Chappaquiddick, which was off of Martha's Vineyard, a black Oldsmobile drove off the Dyke Bridge and plunged into the water. So Ted Kennedy was driving the Oldsmobile. He was 34 years old at the time, and he was in the car with 28-year-old passenger named Mary Jo Kopechne. So according to some of the reports, and let me just say this, the information that has come up over the years has been adding to this story that changes it in loops and directions, and I don't think we'll ever actually know what happened. There are some very interesting theories that I don't think are necessarily conspiracy theories, but some very legitimate theories. But there's a lot that went on at this time. And remember, this is happening pre-cell phones, pre-internet. This is, you going to a vacation island for upper crust wasps on the East Coast, that, there's a lot of drinking, there's a lot of driving, there's a lot of entitled white people milling about, basically.
No, it's certainly evolved, the information that comes out, which is fascinating, very intriguing to think about. A lot of this could have been kept quiet with any one of these theories that come out.
Right. And probably today they would have them, I think it would be probably buried a lot quicker and more efficiently than they did at the time. But so this car, the Oldsmobile, goes off a rickety wooden bridge, one lane wooden bridge with no guardrails, and flips over. it's reported that Kennedy had left a party on Chappaquiddick at 11:15 p.m. with Kopechne in the car. He, throughout this time, maintained that his intent was to immediately take Kopechne to a ferry landing so that she could take a ferry right only like about 1,000 feet. I mean, not very far at all. It was far at all. It was a swimmable distance, but take her to a ferry so that she could take the ferry to the other side to Martha's Vineyard to get to her hotel room because she wasn't feeling well because they had all been drinking throughout the day.
Right.
He reports that he accidentally made a wrong turn onto a dirt road leading to a 1-lane bridge.
So opposite from the direction to the ferry.
Literally a 90-degree turn.
Yeah.
Onto a non-paved road. And it's interesting because there's tons of documentaries that show maps and sort of automated recreations that are very interesting to look at. After the car skidded off the bridge into what's called Pucha Pond, Kennedy swam free and maintained that he tried several times to rescue Kopechne from the submerged car, but he couldn't. And he reports that he tried over and over again to swim down and get her out of this flipped car, and he wasn't able to because the water was very murky and there was a current.
Yeah, and this isn't like a little fishing pond. Like when you look at the aerial view of this, I mean, it's a pretty decent body of water.
So that's what's interesting, though, Shiloh, is that everybody agrees it is a substantial body of water. However, it was common for people to swim across it. So that's
at certain points, I think.
Oh, okay.
You know, like where the ferry was, yes, but I think this other way, it was much more vast and sort of open.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I did not get that out of the material, so thank you for pointing that out. That makes sense because I felt like it was more of a contradiction in reporting, but that explains it. So Kennedy swam free. He had tried to rescue her multiple times. He said that he at one point was so overwhelmed with shock and the alcohol in his system that he crawled up onto the beach and basically laid down and may or may not have taken a nap or gone into a fugue state.
Passed out, whatever.
Passed out, something. But then the decisions he makes following that are pretty bizarre in that he says that the first story was that he had decided that he then swam across at one of those places that he could get across, went to his hotel to shower and get cleaned up, and then went to sleep.
Oh.
But then the story changed again. And the story was that he went and got cleaned up. Then he went back to where his friends were staying on Chappaquiddick and talked to two of his male friends to tell them what happened. They told him, you have to call the police immediately. And he instead went back and went to sleep at his hotel.
Oh.
So... And now this is where it all gets very convoluted because people are saying that the two individuals, and first of all, let me back up a little bit. This whole party that was going on was sort of a get together of a really impressive group of young women who had all worked together on Bobby Kennedy's presidential campaign.
Yeah.
So it was, once again, Kopechne was admired by everyone around her. By all reports, she was just another outstanding young woman, very driven in her work, wonderful hard worker. And this was a way of coming together and honoring the time that they worked together and honoring the death of Kennedy. So, but once again, it had turned into people had been drinking a lot, and it was, sort of this laid back party atmosphere, but there was a lot of alcohol that had been imbibed. So what happens is between, let's see, an off-duty sheriff. Okay, so an off-duty sheriff at the time asserted that he saw a car matching Kennedy's, the Oldsmobile, at 12:40 a.m. driving in that direction. So there was a witness on the scene, and a diver recovered Kopechne's body from the car before 9 a.m. the next morning, and the accident had still not been reported to police by Kennedy. So he was told directly by his friends to go and report it, and he didn't.
Right, right. So we have kind of a weird timeline for when this supposedly happened, like tons of hours of who knows what's happening. And they're not even the ones to report it. Like someone else reports it and they have a diver in the water because they see this car.
Yeah. I mean, and even in the trial,
at daylight.
Right. And in the trial later on, one of the individuals who was there supposedly, he testified that he had directed Kennedy, you've got to report this to the police. But then he walked away and continued on his night. Oh. It's like, who does that? Like and once again, kind of tying this back to our theme today, all of these people are working in politics.
Right.
Seems like a very odd decision to make on everybody's part, certainly on Kennedy's part. So the disturbing thing is that when the accident, when the fire department and they were able to get the divers down, what they found out is that the time of death for Kopechne was actually much later than the actual accident. So it's likely that they theorized that the car flipped, created an air pocket, but the disoriented Kopechne did not know that she was in an upside down position. So she was in the air pocket, but fighting in the wrong direction to get out. So she died probably of asphyxiation as opposed to any kind of violence from the car. That was what they...
right. So she could have been alive for an amount of time where she could have been rescued. Theoretically,
that was one of the things they said, that there was about a 3-hour window that she could have been rescued.
Oh my God.
And her face was pressed into the footwell. Her hands were gripping the back of the front seat like she had been trying to push her head into a pocket of air.
Oh, that makes sense that the car's upside down. So the footwell is going to be up top. So she's got an air pocket.
Right. And you're within this enormous, I mean, in an Oldsmobile at that time was such a heavy car.
Yeah.
Your sense of, and you're underwater, you're not going to have a sense of gravity to orient yourself as to what is up and down. And then the window, everything is murky. So you can't see. And there was alcohol involved. So it's just very, very tragic. So I do want to take a minute to talk about, like you had talked about, Chandra. Mary Jo Kopechne was an amazing woman. She was born in New Jersey. She had volunteered for Bobby Kennedy's presidential campaign while she was in college. She had gotten a business degree for her undergrad. She taught at the Catholic Mission School in Alabama. And then she worked in Florida for a senator before getting a job in Robert Kennedy's Senate office. And during his 1968 presidential campaign, she helped write speeches. And then she continued working in politics after his assassination.
Wow.
So, yeah, I mean, she's just a really outstanding, remarkable woman. And like the nickname for her and her other fellow women that worked on this campaign were the Boiler Room Girls, because they had just been sort of the heart and soul and the drive of Bobby Kennedy's campaign. Mm-hmm. So once again, kind of circling back to what Kennedy said, he asserted that he dove repeatedly into I'm going to quote this, into the strong and murky current to try and find her before making his way back to the cottage on foot. So once again, here's a change in the story depending on, the various sources you go to about what he did immediately after that. So then he allegedly drove back to the scene with his cousin, Joseph Gargan, and political aide, Paul Markham. And it's reported that then they all tried to save Mary Jo and were unsuccessful.
All these stories. If you don't learn anything from today's episode, pick a story and stick with it.
Right. Right. Absolutely. So now the story changes to what is added onto the story is Kennedy says that Mary Jo felt ill at the party and that they were going to head back to the ferry in Edgerton, where they were both staying at different hotels. So what's weird about this, or I don't know, I mean, it's considered odd, but maybe it's not, is that she left her purse and hotel room key at the cottage where the party was held. But, when there's alcohol involved and everybody's stumbling around, you're not really, you may not be thinking. I don't know if that's necessarily as big of a factor as people make it out to be. And, when it was all said and done in the court and the charges, he went to trial. They knocked the sentence down and he pled guilty to a charge of leaving the scene of an accident. And then he received a 2-month suspended jail sentence. So now this was cue of the main conspiracy theory at the time was that because he was already married, he that she was pregnant. And that's why it was all under a cloud of mystery that she was pregnant. And
they said that about Chandra Levy too.
Exactly. So they were trying to, that this was a murder plot by the Kennedys to take her out, which is incredibly overcomplicated. Like, why would you go to that extent? That's just not the most likely thing to happen. And his conduct really, I mean, this is one of the things going back to Gary Condit and looking at Kennedy's conduct is he said, they're asking him like, tell us, what your motivation was. Like, why did you make the decisions you made at that time? And he would say that his conduct at the time made no sense to me at all. And he also asserted that he regarded his failure to report the crash immediately as indefensible, which I got to tell you, good for you for owning that, because it absolutely is indefensible. No matter how drunk you are, unless you're so blackout drunk that you don't know what you're doing. And then if you're that blackout drunk, you're not likely to be jumping back into the water multiple times. So
how did he even get out? I'm surprised he survived the crash or was able to swim free himself.
Well, that's interesting from looking at, I have not for this one, but I've looked in the past at various sort of car fatality and car tragedy incidents. And it is crazy what happens when a car goes out of control. Mm-hmm. And this was before the time of seatbelts.
Mm-hmm.
Seatbelt laws were not in effect at this time. And I think that would have a big effect. If you're thinking about, he's going at a high rate of speed over a single lane rickety bridge, and then it flips as it falls off. If the window was open, he could have been thrown out, or he could have already just found his way out. But this is what's really interesting, is that even TMZ in 2019 said that a CIA individual reported to them that they had been on this case, that it had been continued to be investigated over decades, and that most likely what happened is that there was another person on the scene, and the other person on the scene was a female married to a prominent senator known and verified to be at that location on Chappaquiddick at that time that Kennedy was having an affair with.
Okay, I'm following you.
Okay, so someone reported also, there was another witness on the scene that witnessed the car drive by. It was a teenager who was hanging out with her friends late at night at their parents' summer cabin. And she reported that there were 3 people in the car as they drove by. There was a person sitting in the back. So the theory is that the Boiler Room girls were drinking. Mary Jo got very ill from drinking so much. This cabin was so small, there was no place for her to lay down quietly. So she went, leaving her purse and her hotel room key, went out, laid in the back seat of the Oldsmobile.
That would make sense.
To nap or to sleep it off. And then when Kennedy and his side piece, whoever it were in the car, they didn't realize until they were going at this high rate of speed. And Kopechne woke up in the back seat, or came to in the back seat, maybe got startled, or maybe they were erratically driving because of the alcohol, and then flipped over. So Kennedy got out. This unknown woman got out, and she's been able to keep her identity in the shadows all this time. Mm-hmm. But Kopechne was not able to get out and drown.
Wow. Well, that makes sense why the story was kind of bullshit, that they were going to the ferry, to the hotels. What if he was if there's no room in this small cabin, he wants to go have sex with this woman. Let's drive out, go down this dirt road, see where it leads, go do our thing, come back. But oh shit, there's someone in the back seat.
Right.
Wow,
so
interesting.
It's an interesting theory. And I have to say, I'm not the hugest fan of TMZ and Harvey Levin, but I will give them grudging respect, is that, they're usually right. the stories they publish that just sound so salacious are usually based in truth. It'd be interesting to see if anybody's done a statistical breakdown of it, but they've been proven over and over again to actually have the scoops on things. And interesting too, that it's so recent, as recent as 2019 that this comes up.
Yeah. Well, there was a film made about this with Kate Mara and Ed Helms just a year or two ago.
Yeah.
And I didn't see it, but have you seen it?
I didn't, but it's supposed to be pretty good. It's supposed to be a slow burn. I saw
the trailer. It looks really good. I want to know what kind of theory they go with in it. I want to watch it after this.
So one of the big questions is, why didn't Kennedy go to prison? And, to circle back around to the legal process, in order to charge someone with involuntary manslaughter, the law enforcement would have to establish that that individual did something illegal, like speeding or driving under the influence. So even at that time, there had to be major Kennedy spin doctors at work. So there was immediate damage control, and there were a lot of legal efforts undertaken by a group of Kennedy confidants and advisors, including ex-Defense Secretary Robert McNamara and JFK speechwriter Ted Sorensen. So you got a speechwriter.
Yeah. Lots of spin doctors spinning this how they want. I think the biggest issue is the period of time where evidence was lost too, right? You can call all of your Kennedy people and get those brains start working on how they're going to cover this up or spin it. But also law enforcement's kind of left with nothing because you don't have evidence. You don't have, you can't take evidence to prove DUI at that point. Nobody was there, so you can't prove that there was reckless driving or speeding or something that led to the death.
Right.
Just all they have to rest on is an accident. And so the best they can do is leaving the scene of a crime.
And interestingly, another parallel to what you were talking about, not necessarily at the time of the trial, but that same weekend of the accident, the entire world was looking at a major historical moment. That was the moon landing of Apollo 11. So they lifted off from Cape Canaveral on July 16th, 1969. And then on the evening of July 20th, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin took their first steps on the moon's surface. So, wow, talk about a distraction, Yeah.
It's all about how much media attention some of these incidents get, right? How high profile they're going to be. This was still clearly high profile. You have the remaining Kennedy brother involved in this incident. But when half, the world's attention is over here, it's not going to be as massive or salacious as if, it was the only thing going on that weekend.
Right. And one of the additional things too, that draws a parallel to your example is that Ted Kennedy was really, this is somebody who came, he was sort of the black sheep, the outlier from the family, but he had pulled it together politically. He had been he had dropped out of law school, or he failed out of law school. He'd had a military career, and interestingly enough, has only recently died of cancer, and ended up being kind of an amazing politician that set in motion many really great policies here in the U.S.
Right.
But certainly during whatever happened here was a real example of horrifically bad judgment, including one of the other theories is that he was involved as well, like many of these politicians, in a lot of affairs. So there's once again this sort of issue of hierarchy, power, control, being in that position, and are they using sex escapism, or are they using sex in an escapist way, or a way to manage the stresses of being a politician? There's so many different ways that could go. But it's certainly bad judgment overall.
Yeah, it is, but so we see a lot of this in law enforcement as well, and I think it is in the personality makeup. It's having just enough of that personality makeup that wants to be adventurous and a little risky. And, actually the things that we look for when we're doing, I don't do pre-employment psych evaluations for cops, but I've done some research in the area. And you want a little bit of risk-taking behavior because you want that person to run towards danger, right? When no one else will. But that can translate into really having some thrill-seeking tendencies in their life. And one of those areas, like if you have a politician that is willing to go out there and face this crazy life of a politician and constantly like sort of getting a high off of these risk-taking situations, sex is and affairs, like especially because there's like that taboo nature around it.
Yeah.
That's why they're not coming out in the open and saying, hey, here I am, here's what I do. The secrecy is a thrilling part of it.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree. I wanted to give one more example that's even more recent of this same sort of thrill-seeking,
bad decision making
and complete evasion in a male politician. And that is Mark Sanford, who is a governor in South Carolina, disappears for a week from public view. And his office officially states that he is hiking in the Appalachian Trail. And that's what he told them as he was leaving. I'll be gone for 5 days, won't be able to get in touch with me. I'm hiking the Appalachian Trail, which is, by the way, a really lovely trail. It's like an amazing hike here in the U.S.
Sounds great. Yeah.
It's fantastic.
Good self-care. I'm liking it so far.
Good for you. And what's interesting is that his wife, when interviewed after what I'm going to talk about in a moment happens, his wife says, oh, yeah, he needs alone time. He needs to get away from the job and the kids. So he just disappears for days at a time. Like she was kind of okay with it. And it turns out he had been having an ongoing affair with an Argentinian journalist. And it was revealed that throughout his marriage, Sanford had engaged in a number of extramarital affairs. So on June 24th, Sanford arrived at the Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport on Delta Flight 110 from Buenos Aires. And he was met by a reporter who had started sniffing around and figuring out that something was going wrong. And he agreed to a brief sit-down interview, and he claimed that he was alone for the entire trip, didn't give any details other than he drove the coastline. So I just need some me time. So I'm just going to use my Delta miles, get me a trip to Buenos Aires and walk on the beach. Because those American beaches just aren't nearly as relaxing.
And thank you for giving us the flight number, Scott. That's very detailed research.
It is very detailed. He said that, and then when he was pressed, he had considered hiking the Appalachian Trail, but at the last minute, he saw all these points that he had and got an award ticket from Delta. And
that's
then
funny.
he was asked,
so he really did say he was using his Delta miles.
Yeah, he actually did. No.
I thought that was your creative.
No, it's great. That's hilarious. Exactly one of the things that was said. So apparently at one point, Scott English, who was his campaign manager, or his chief of staff, actually had contacted him and said, you need to get home. This is a big deal. And he, once again, sort of in that condit way, he just didn't understand why it was such a big deal. And isn't that interesting? Like, we expect our politicians to be sort of on top of what's going on and understand what the problems are. And here's somebody that just did not understand why it was that big of a deal. So that was really, it set up a great dynamic between his staff and a Republican challenger who rightly said, lies, lies, lies. That's all we get from his staff. That's all we get from his people. That's all we get from him. And, she was right. He just lied about it over and over again. And he said some just odd things about that. The reason he was in this affair was because, he had met his soulmate. And, even years later, he was said, yeah, I know. And I said some goofy things, but they were all true. Just so really, once again, a bizarre and very disrespectful to his wife and the other members of his family that was to make a statement like that. That's the part that we don't need to know.
And they're sort of creating their own reality and then putting it out there as if we're going to accept it.
Right. Like that justifies it. Well, it was my soulmate. So that's why I lied about going to the Appalachian Trail. But once again, because American public, is always there to forgive somebody, he got elected 2 more times. They had censured him. They tried to impeach him. They were not successful in the state government, but they did censure him, which here in the States, censuring is sort of like a wagging of a finger, like you did something really bad. It doesn't really hold a lot of weight.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me.
But he went on to, they named that he had engaged in 37 violations that he generated during office. He was censured, but he went back and reinvented himself as a congressman, and he successfully won a seat in Congress for 2 terms. So just,
alrighty.
Yeah, I mean, once again, sort of that being able to create a different reality for themselves, which I think goes back to our opening points of ego and sort of those doses of narcissism that in some ways will feed a politician and serve them well, and in these cases really sent them down paths that were not good.
Yeah. Wow. So all the overlap, it really does have, a regular politician who's not involved in these shenanigans. I think there's probably one personality profile, and then we're sort of looking into the window of the others.
Right. And these are what, 2 examples. These are just 2 examples of hundreds that we could probably go through. I wanted you to, though, you picked out a great TV representation that we should end on, because I never watched. This is a show that I'm going to have to marathon at some point, but I feel icky about it because
I know,
Kevin Spacey
has fucking ruined it for us. No, when I think of power and corruption and politics and murder, I think of House of Cards, and it was, I think it was one of the first like Netflix original shows when they started streaming. So it was started in 2013. It ran for 6 seasons. It's basically described as like an American political thriller. I believe there was a British version first, I want to say. Never watched it. But it's set in DC, and it's the story of Congressman Frank Underwood, who's played by Kevin Spacey, and he's a Democrat from South Carolina. And he's the House Majority Whip, and his wife is the equally ambitious Claire Underwood, who played by Robin Wright. Also, my work apparel fashion icon is Claire Underwood, the character. I try to dress like her when I go to work.
Well, her styling on the show is so great, and she's a great character, great actress.
So great. But there's just it is very fitting called House of Cards. I mean, the long game of manipulation that Frank Underwood plays throughout the most of the seasons is just, it's really incredible. It's ingenious. It's there are a lot of people that he ends up having killed off or kills off himself, and people that you really like, but the characters are just so fantastic. And like I was talking about that buzz that you feel when you go to Washington, D.C., like this sort of feeds off of that, just like this powerful stuff happening, but is there this underground shady stuff happening too? And this is obviously the extreme fun version of that in media. But I also feel as if it's a depiction of like these 2 psychopaths married to each other, which is kind of cool. He and Claire.
Yeah, she's great as well. And I do know I have absolute utter respect for Kevin Spacey as an actor, but I think it's interesting that you chose this particular example because although Kevin Spacey is not a politician, why did I say it? Politician. He's not a politician. He's a very accomplished and gifted actor, but he himself has had a best known secret kind of identity in Hollywood for years, knowing that he was gay, knowing that he was really sort of approaching people that he should not be approaching, including a lot of straight guys. He was notorious for approaching straight guys on set. Making them very uncomfortable. And because he was part of a very powerful machine, he was able to cover it up. But interestingly enough, like after all this stuff went down with Spacey, he did this bizarre video that he posted online.
Oh, that's
where
right.
He was in character as his character from House of Cards, as Frank Underwood, sort of explaining that it's not that big of a deal, and when you find out what's really going on, it was the most twisted and
so bizarre.
Do you lack the insight to know that you're actually, if you're trying to make an ironic metaphor, you're actually only damning yourself further? It was just very interesting to see that someone's ego at this point is so disorganized that they would think that this would be appropriate.
Right. And it was weird because in the series, he speaks to the audience. What is that called? Breaking the fourth wall?
Yeah.
Or something like that. Okay. So he does. He like speaks the audience to the camera every once in a while. And that's what he was doing in this bit on YouTube. And like, can't Netflix like sue him over that? Like, what is, you're just thinking like all of this lack of insight. And it was incredibly bizarre and just like really gross, like you said.
Yeah, it was discomforting. I mean, really discomforting to look at something like that and go, what are you trying to say? And like, if I, you know, I'm a huge film and TV buff and I love actors and the work that they do. And like, but I can't figure out what it is that's driving you to make this message. Like, what do you think you're doing? Do you think you're improving yourself? Because that's delusional.
And coming back to like, who's advising you? And are you listening to those people?
Well, clearly not. Clearly not. Yeah, that's one of the things where Netflix would look at that and go, oh, we're not touching this with a 10-foot pole. He's going to dig himself in so deep. Why bother, you know?
Yeah. Very good. This was a great, timely, fun thing to dive into.
Really? Thank you.
Yes.
So I don't know if we'll make it back before the holidays. We might. We'll see what happens over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
If we don't hear from you guys or see you guys, I won't go into it now, but like I don't even want to call them fans because like I feel like our listeners are our friends because we are starting to see you guys on Get Vocal and we see you on Twitter and I won't even, if anybody wants to see what's going on, go over to Twitter and look at what's been going down.
Yeah,
like we have some really great friends out there, and thank you so much for being our friends and our supporters, our listeners, and our fans. We really appreciate it.
Yes, and this Saturday, following this episode is the CrimeCon house arrest event. But if you're not attending that or watching it virtually, which is the only way in which people can attend it, in air quotes, come join us on Get Vocal.
Yeah, come join us.
Pacific Standard Time.
Or go back and forth and tell us what's going on. That'd be fun.
Yeah. Give us some updates on what's happening over there. But we're your alternative-free entertainment for Saturday for an hour. So Please join us. And we'll be back with something exciting next time. And I guess we'll see you then. Okay.
On LA.
Not so.
Confidential. Thanks, folks. Catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.